Imagine a world where every move you make is silently observed, every message you send is intercepted, and every secret you hold could be the key to national security. In the shadows, unseen operatives navigate borders, infiltrate hostile networks, and neutralize threats before anyone even knows they exist. Today, we reveal the untold stories of Pakistan's most secretive intelligence agency, where the line between reality and secrecy is almost invisible. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Where are you watching from today? Sit tight and stay with us, because we are about to dive deep into the most secretive operations, dangerous missions, and the incredible training of the agents who operate in complete secrecy. Let's get started with this thrilling journey into the shadows. When Pakistan was born in 1947, it was not a nation. Prepared for peace, it was a nation forged in migration, blood, and chaos, as millions moved across borders and cities or filled with despair. The newborn country faced immediate threats from hostile neighbors and internal instability. There was no organized intelligence agency, no silent shield to watch the shadows and interpret. The unseen, every government office struggled to maintain order, while foreign eyes were already scanning the new territory for weaknesses. At that crucial moment, the idea of a secret organization was conceived, not as a plan, but as a necessity, a silent force that would operate in darkness, unseen, unheard, and unnoticed. Its purpose was clear: to gather information, anticipate threats, and neutralize dangers before they materialized. But it could not exist openly. It needed no fame, no recognition, and no public presence. The first foundations were modest rooms in ordinary buildings, obscure offices without labels or guards, only a few men who understood the risks and accepted the oath to serve in total secrecy. These men developed a code of conduct based on observation and discretion. Trust was earned, not given. Instructions were minimal, and every action was measured against potential consequences. Mistakes could cost lives not only of agents, but of the nation itself. In those early days, files were handwritten, and carefully coded orders were passed verbally or through subtle signals. Identities were concealed with numbers and aliases, while the whole staff studied maps, enemy communications, and regional politics tirelessly. They had to anticipate threats from both across the borders and from within the newly forming government. At the same time, psychological training began. The agents were taught to observe behavior patterns, analyze motives, and detect deception without technology. Because at that time, intelligence relied on human skill, instinct, and careful attention. Every sound mattered, every silence carried a message. These men learned to read between the lines, to interpret subtle gestures, and to recognize patterns of danger before they became visible. The early operations were limited by precise crossing borders, gathering information, monitoring hostile movements, and reporting silently became their routine. Gradually, this invisible network expanded, recruiting skilled individuals trained in mental resilience, stealth, and analytical thinking. Over time, the organization developed internal hierarchies that were never documented in public, yet were critical for operations. There were units responsible for signals interception, others for human intelligence, and some specialized in psychological profiling. The lessons learned in these first years laid the groundwork for decades of intelligence operations, shaping regional events silently yet decisively. The philosophy of the shadow was clear: control the information, act before being seen, and disappear without trace. In these formative years, the organization not only survived, it became indispensable to national security, preparing itself to evolve into a sophisticated agency capable of operating in every dimension of modern intelligence. The birth of this shadow empire was therefore not a ceremony. It was a quiet emergence into necessity and survival. From that point onward, Pakistan's security apparatus would never be the same, and the seeds of a disciplined yet invisible force were firmly planted in the corridors of secrecy. As the shadow network grew, it needed a center, a heart, from which all intelligence would flow. Yet this heart could not be known. It could not be marked on maps. It had to exist in plain sight. But Hidden in function ordinary buildings, disguised as offices, warehouses, and rented flats, became nodes of information gathering and analysis within these walls. The early operatives created a language of silence files. Carried no names, only codes and diagrams. Orders were verbal, encrypted in ways that only those trained could understand. Security was maintained through isolation and compartmentalization. No agent ever saw the whole picture. Departments functioned like independent organs, each responsible for a slice of intelligence. Signals were intercepted, human networks monitored, and psychological profiles maintained meticulously. To predict foreign moves, the agents learned to blend with civilians, to observe without detection, to record and remember without being noticed. Their lives became schedules of silent observation, and reporting every gesture and every word outside could carry hidden meaning. Inside these walls, they became experts in reading the invisible. Every meeting was a test, every observation an experiment, every report a step closer to creating a predictive map of threats. The infrastructure of the headquarters itself was designed to confuse outsiders. Doors led to different offices on different days. Corridors were rearranged, routes changed frequently. Clocks showed different times, and even seating arrangements were rotated, so that patterns could not be recognized by untrained eyes. While technology slowly made its way in computers, and early communication devices were used cautiously because human analysis was still considered superior and less. Traceable agents were trained in advanced mental exercises to enhance memory, observation, and deduction. Every trainee was monitored constantly, their reactions measured, their understanding tested through repeated simulations of crisis, betrayals, and confrontations. Some candidates failed and were quietly removed from operations. Others adapted and thrived. This invisible fortress became a laboratory for the human mind, teaching men and women to survive in isolation, to operate under stress, and to anticipate threats that had not yet appeared outside this system. The world moved unaware of the silent empire growing within a country that was itself young, yet already threatened by multiple fronts. Yet despite the pressure, the organization maintained its purpose, absolute discretion, operational efficiency, and the relentless pursuit of foresight. As years passed, these headquarters expanded their reach, developing early signals intelligence units, cryptography sections, and human intelligence networks across borders, quietly shaping the future of operations and establishing methods that would make the agency indispensable to national security. The philosophy of observation, anticipation, and discrete action became ingrained in every member and every operation, creating a culture where information was the most valuable weapon and silence the most effective shield. While outsiders saw only routine buildings inside these walls, the unseen hands moved continuously, ensuring that the shadow network not only survived, but began to dominate the intelligence landscape without ever being noticed. How agents are made. Within the invisible headquarters, the process of creating agents began with the dismantling of identity. Every candidate was stripped of personal history. Names were replaced with codes, memories emotionally detached, and family ties temporarily severed, because the first rule of a shadow agent was to belong only to the mission. Isolation became the first teacher. Trainees spent weeks confined in controlled environments designed to test endurance. Patience and focus clocks were intentionally unreliable. Lights switched unexpectedly, and schedules changed daily to prevent predictability. While under these conditions, candidates were subjected to simulated crisis, betrayals, and high-pressure scenarios, each scenario designed to elicit instinctive responses and expose weaknesses. They were taught to control heartbeat and breathing, to remain outwardly calm under extreme stress, and to develop observation skills that could detect danger in the smallest of movements. A hand twitch, a delayed blink, or a shift in posture could reveal hidden intentions. Exercises forced them to remember long sequences of numbers, codes, and behavioral patterns, enhancing memory and attention to detail. Interpersonal skills were also tested, as agents had to interact without revealing knowledge or intent. They learned to blend seamlessly with crowds, to eavesdrop unnoticed, and to extract information through subtle interrogation techniques. Psychological resilience was continuously reinforced through periods of sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and cognitive overload exercises designed to push mental boundaries while maintaining functional operational capacity. Failures were neither punished with violence nor shame. They were addressed through isolation and repetition, which was considered more effective in forcing adaptation than any conventional training methods. Gradual exposure to deception, betrayal, and loss taught agents emotional detachment as a survival mechanism. Empathy was recalibrated to assess situations without compromising judgment. They were trained in contingency planning, multiple alternative courses of action for every mission, and instructed in risk analysis to anticipate reactions before they occurred. Advanced observation techniques were drilled relentlessly. Body language, microexpressions, and vocal tones analyzed for hidden meaning. Ethical lines were blurred in exercises to prepare operatives for morally complex decisions in real operations. Decision-making had to be instantaneous and unclouded by personal feelings. Teamwork was fostered through controlled interdependence. Each agent's actions could directly impact others, creating a network of accountability and precision. Over time, these men and women transformed from ordinary individuals into highly disciplined operators, able to enter any environment unnoticed, gather intelligence, and exit without leaving trace. Every skill learned in these early years would form the foundation for decades of covert operations. The emphasis on mental fortitude, adaptability, and foresight became the hallmark of a generation of operatives capable of handling threats in multiple domains, from domestic espionage to cross-border intelligence gathering. The creation of agents was not merely a process of training. It was a deliberate molding of human capacity into an instrument of silent power. The shadow was no longer just an idea. It had taken human shape, ready to operate in the invisible world, where patience, secrecy, and precision were the ultimate weapons. Silent operations across borders. As the agents completed their initial training, the network began to extend its reach across borders silently and invisibly. Missions were assigned that required infiltration, intelligence gathering, and reporting without leaving any trace. The first operations were small but strategically vital, understanding troop movements, supply lines, political vulnerabilities, and clandestine communications became a primary focus. Every detail was critical and could determine the outcome of regional stability. Operatives were sent in teams or alone, depending on the sensitivity of the mission. Their movement was carefully calculated using both human intelligence and limited technological surveillance. They learned to use disguises and assumed identities to blend into foreign environments, observing without alerting, listening without revealing, and moving without detection. Even minor errors could jeopardize lives or compromise entire networks. In these missions, psychological endurance was as important as physical skill. Agents had to maintain composure in stressful environments, adapting rapidly to changing conditions while processing large amounts of intelligence. Information communication back to headquarters relied on coded messages, dead drops, and brief contacts. Never open lines, as the philosophy of invisibility dictated that operational presence must never be obvious. These operations required constant situational awareness, reading not only the obvious threats, but also subtle cues in body language, local behavior, and social dynamics. Agents had to anticipate potential conflicts and resolve them preemptively without drawing attention to themselves. Training exercises were continuously reinforced with real-world experiences, as every mission offered new lessons in adaptability, problem-solving, and the silent art of influence. They were instructed to understand the cultural, social, and political subtleties of each location, because knowledge could be a weapon more powerful than any tool or firearm. The network also developed a layered system of informants and allies, carefully managed to provide information while minimizing exposure. Recruitment of local sources was carried out with extreme caution, often through subtle persuasion and long-term observation rather than coercion. Over time, the agents became masters at navigating complex environments, both urban and rural, in unfamiliar territories. the organization refined the process of preparing contingencies for contingencies, analyzing multiple scenarios simultaneously to ensure that even if a plan failed, critical information or strategic advantage was preserved. Each successful mission reinforced the principle that the most effective operation is the one that is completed without anyone ever knowing it happened. The philosophy of silent action became deeply ingrained, creating a generation of operatives capable of monitoring, predicting, and countering threats far beyond their home territory, quietly influencing events across borders without attracting attention, shaping outcomes in a world that never knew the true extent of the shadow network's reach and power. Silent operations across borders, espionage, and the shadows. As the shadow network matured, its focus shifted from merely observing external threats to understanding the deeper structures of intelligence within. The region agents were now tasked with infiltrating hostile networks, collecting data on political intentions, military strategies, and economic movements. The process was meticulous, every move calculated, every interaction observed. The operatives were trained to identify vulnerabilities within organizations using subtle interrogation techniques and passive observation rather than overt actions, because a discovered agent could unravel months or years of planning the network. Developed complex human intelligence systems relying on informants who themselves often had no knowledge of the larger operations. Agents learned to manage these sources with care to extract maximum information while maintaining their anonymity, and safety codes and encrypted communications were constantly evolved using methods that could survive if the source was compromised. Every report was analyzed multiple times by senior operatives, comparing patterns, checking for anomalies, and predicting possible future scenarios. Psychological profiling became an essential tool, understanding the motivations, fears, and likely responses of individuals and enemy networks allowed the agency to act preemptively while avoiding unnecessary risk simulations. And controlled operations within training facilities prepared agents for real-world situations. They studied the history of espionage, analyzing past successes and failures to adapt techniques to contemporary threats. Every misstep was scrutinized, and every successful operation became a model to be replicated. The network placed high emphasis on adaptability and mental flexibility. Agents learned to think multiple steps ahead to predict both intended and unintended consequences of actions. Cross-border communication with operatives in hostile territory required precision, and timing. Delays or errors could result in exposure and failure. Therefore, redundancy and contingency planning were ingrained into operational protocols. The agency also invested heavily in technological countermeasures, analyzing encrypted communications, tracking patterns of movement, and learning to detect attempts to infiltrate their own network while maintaining operational security was paramount. These efforts gradually created a picture of the enemy's internal workings, allowing the shadow network to preemptively influence outcomes. Often without direct intervention, the culture of this part of the organization emphasized patience, observation, and discretion. Every operative understood that the most powerful act in intelligence is often the one that leaves no trace. The knowledge gained through these silent efforts became the most potent weapon, allowing the network to anticipate threats, neutralize risks, and ensure that the shadow empire operated with both reach and subtlety, far beyond what any conventional force could achieve. The web of counterintelligence. As the shadow network solidified its power, it became clear that protecting its own infrastructure was as vital as gathering intelligence. Externally, internal threats, potential leaks, and enemy infiltrators had to be detected and neutralized before any damage could occur. This led to the establishment of an extensive and enemy infiltrators had to be detected and neutralized before any damage could occur. This led to the establishment of an extensive counterintelligence system designed to identify vulnerabilities within the network itself. Operatives, trained in observation and analysis, constantly monitored not only external threats, but also patterns of behavior within their own ranks. Any unusual contact, unexplained communication, or deviation from standard procedure was logged and investigated meticulously. The counterintelligence units operated like an invisible police force within the shadows, quietly assessing loyalty and competence without alerting the wider organization. Because overt investigation could create suspicion and panic, they learned to use deception as a tool within the network, creating false scenarios to test operatives' reactions and uncover hidden intentions. Advanced psychological profiling became a standard practice. Agents were studied for subtle cues in behavior, tone of voice, facial micro-expressions, and decision-making patterns. Even the smallest anomaly could indicate potential compromise or susceptibility to manipulation across multiple layers of the network. Redundant communication channels were maintained, ensuring that if one line was breached, another could deliver critical information securely. Encryption methods were constantly updated and rotated to prevent predictability. Every agent was trained to recognize signs of surveillance or manipulation by foreign powers. The philosophy of compartmentalization ensured that no single operative had full access to sensitive information, minimizing risk in case of capture or betrayal. Infiltration simulations became more sophisticated. Agents were placed in controlled exercises where trusted operatives posed as enemy agents to test reactions and resilience. These drills honed skills in deception detection, rapid decision-making, and crisis management. A culture of discretion and vigilance was continuously reinforced. Meetings were limited, information shared on a need-to-know basis, and trust was earned through proven competence. Repeated exposure to high-stakes scenarios created operatives capable of identifying complex plots before they unfolded. The shadow network's counterintelligence also extended across borders. Agents monitored suspected foreign intelligence activities, tracking patterns of espionage, identifying likely sources of leaks, and preemptively neutralizing potential threats. Covert operations were planned in multiple layers with redundant safety measures, so that even if a single plan failed, the network's integrity remained intact over time. This web of counterintelligence became the backbone of the organization, allowing it not only to gather intelligence, but to shield itself from the invisible threats that constantly sought to dismantle it. While external operations focused on observing and influencing adversaries, the internal network ensured survival through meticulous discipline, constant vigilance, and the application of strategic foresight, creating a dual system of offense and defense, operating silently, efficiently, and without leaving a trace, ensuring that the Shadow Empire remained invincible in its invisibility. The web of counterintelligence. By the time the network had fully matured, its operatives were ready for missions that required absolute secrecy and precision. The most sensitive operations involved infiltrating hostile territories, where even a small misstep could result in catastrophic exposure. Agents operated in cells, each with limited knowledge of the broader mission to maintain operational security. Every assignment was planned with meticulous detail, from the timing of departure to the selection of equipment and disguises. Surveillance of targets was conducted over days and sometimes weeks, using both human intelligence and carefully monitored technological tools. Agents would map out routines, communications, and behaviors, noting patterns that could be exploited while maintaining their invisibility in the very invisibility. Environment psychological preparation was key. Operatives rehearsed multiple scenarios, anticipating unexpected encounters, and developing adaptive strategies to respond without detection. Every mission demanded split-second decision-making and improvisation. Without hesitation or emotion, the philosophy of invisibility dictated that the most effective mission was one that left no evidence, no witnesses, and no trace of presence. Agents learned to move within crowds, blend with locals, and disappear into environments as naturally as shadows falling on walls. Communication during these missions relied entirely on coded signals, dead drops, and pre-established sequences to ensure no electronic trace could be intercepted. Redundancies were planned for every contingency. Escape routes, cover stories, and alternate plans were always prepared. The missions were not only about gathering intelligence, but also about subtle influence, disrupting enemy plans by creating uncertainty, miscommunication, or false leads without direct confrontation. This required careful timing, strategic patience, and a deep understanding of human behavior. Sometimes operatives would create elaborate scenarios in which the enemy was manipulated into revealing critical information or making strategic mistakes. These operations demanded mental and emotional resilience. Agents faced extreme isolation, long hours of observation, and constant risk of exposure while maintaining operational effectiveness over time. The agency refined the methodology of these covert operations, developing a culture where each operative became an expert in adaptive planning, improvisation, and silent execution. Every action, gesture, and movement was calculated, rehearsed, and measured. The cumulative effect of these missions ensured that adversaries were constantly being monitored, their plans subtly disrupted, and their capabilities contained without ever knowing that a hidden network of operatives was silently shaping the strategic landscape. Every mission reinforced the principle that the most powerful form of influence is invisible, and that the agency's reach extended far beyond the public eye, operating in darkness, silence, and precision, creating a legacy of unseen impact that would define the agency's capabilities for decades to come. Missions in the dark, the Shadow legacy. As the Shadow network reached its pinnacle, the agency's influence spanned every dimension of intelligence, from domestic surveillance to complex cross-border operations. The final phase of training merged all disciplines: psychological resilience, tactical skill, operational foresight, and adaptive thinking were fused into a single operative capable of responding to any threat without hesitation. Every agent was now a node in a vast web of observation, anticipation, and action. The missions became larger in scale, more intricate, and more consequential. International intelligence was gathered not just through human sources, but also by careful interception of communications, subtle monitoring of diplomatic movements, and analyzing economic indicators that could signal strategic shifts in neighboring countries. Agents became adept at combining traditional fieldwork with advanced analytical reasoning. They could identify patterns in seemingly trivial information that could prevent potential threats before they emerged. Training for these complex operations included simulated high-risk environments, role-playing enemy agents, and repeated exposure to deception and betrayal to ensure operatives could think critically. Under pressure, multiple contingency plans were developed for every mission: escape routes, cover identities, alternate strategies, and emergency protocols were ingrained into the operative's mind so that every action could pivot seamlessly depending on circumstances. Collaboration between operatives became a silent language where subtle gestures and coded signals conveyed volumes without spoken words. Missions often involved crossing borders under deep cover, establishing networks of informants, conducting surveillance without alerting the targets. Merged all disciplines: psychological resilience, tactical skill, operational foresight, and adaptive thinking were fused into a single operative, capable of responding to any threat without hesitation. Every agent was now a node in a vast web of observation, anticipation, and action. The missions became larger in scale, more intricate, and more consequential. International intelligence was gathered not just through human sources, but also by careful interception of communications, subtle monitoring of diplomatic movements, and analyzing economic indicators that could signal strategic shifts in neighboring countries. Agents became adept at combining traditional fieldwork with advanced analytical reasoning. They could identify patterns in seemingly trivial information that could prevent potential threats before they emerged. Training for these complex operations included simulated high-risk environments, role-playing enemy agents, and repeated exposure to deception and betrayal to ensure operatives could think critically under pressure. Multiple contingency plans were developed for every mission: escape routes, cover identities, alternate strategies, and emergency protocols were ingrained into the operative's mind so that every action could pivot seamlessly depending on circumstances. Collaboration between operatives became a silent language where subtle gestures and coded signals conveyed volumes without spoken words. Missions often involved crossing borders under deep cover, establishing networks of informants, conducting surveillance without alerting the targets, and intercepting information crucial to national security operations required both patience, and improvisation agents were trained to remain invisible, sometimes for days, blending into urban environments or remote terrains without compromising the mission intelligence analysis units meticulously. Studied enemy behavior, predicting political decisions, military maneuvers, and covert strategies. Agents monitored communications between hostile states, observed their infrastructure developments, and even anticipated logistical movements while remaining undetected. The agency's counterintelligence division continued to operate as a critical safeguard. Every potential insider threat was evaluated, suspicious patterns investigated, and operatives tested constantly through controlled simulations. These measures ensured that the network remained impenetrable and its secrets never exposed. The psychological toll on agents was immense, yet carefully managed the training, mentorship, and peer monitoring helped mitigate the stress. Emotional detachment and moral ambiguities inherent in espionage. A culture of discipline, secrecy, and intellectual rigor became second nature. Every agent understood that their identity was subordinate to the mission. The philosophy of invisibility dictated that actions, influence, and results mattered more than recognition or fame. Over decades, the agency expanded its capabilities, integrating advanced technology, cryptography, human intelligence, and strategic planning into a seamless operational framework. By now, the Shadow Network had become a silent yet decisive force, shaping regional dynamics without the world ever realizing the extent of its reach. From intercepting sensitive communications to neutralizing threats before they could materialize, every facet of the agency's operations contributed to the national security and stability of the state. The legacy created was not one of visible power, but of silent dominance. The nation's enemies often underestimated the invisible hands that influenced outcomes, manipulated scenarios, and anticipated moves. They never knew that every decision, every strategy, and every move was carefully observed by a network of operatives who could vanish without trace and appear where least expected. Today, this legacy continues with evolved methodologies, sophisticated technology, and generations of trained operatives maintaining vigilance. The Shadow lives on as a testament to secrecy, precision, and intelligence in action. It is a reminder that true power in espionage is measured not by visibility but by the ability to influence events silently and decisively. As we conclude this documentary, remember to like, subscribe, and share this story of shadows so the world can glimpse the hidden layers of intelligence without compromising security. Disclaimer: this documentary is based on historical research, open source information, and declassified materials. Any fictionalization is minimal and for narrative continuity only. The first 8 segments of the Shadow Network's evolution reveal a meticulously designed architecture of intelligence, secrecy, and strategic foresight from the very inception. The agency was built to anticipate threats that the newly formed nation could not openly confront. Every early decision reflected an understanding of geopolitical realities and internal vulnerabilities. The initial foundations focused on creating a silent, invisible force capable of acting before dangers became visible. The recruitment, psychological training, and early operational protocols were all designed to ensure that agents would act as extensions of the organization rather than individuals. Their preparation encompassed mental endurance, observation, adaptive thinking, and improvisational skill, setting the tone for decades of covert operations. The analysis of the invisible headquarters shows that the agency's operational philosophy was deeply rooted in compartmentalization and information control offices and communication. Systems were deliberately obfuscated to prevent any single point of failure. Even minor mistakes were treated as lessons for systemic improvement. The human intelligence component was emphasized throughout every mission, highlighted the importance of blending analytical reasoning with practical fieldwork. Agents learned to anticipate adversary behavior using both historical context and real-time observation. The cross-border operations revealed not only tactical execution, but also strategic influence, the subtle disruption of enemy plans, careful mapping of behaviors, and extraction of intelligence without confrontation showcased the psychological depth of espionage. Counterintelligence focus was equally critical, understanding that the most dangerous threats often come from within the organization. The agency built a culture of continuous monitoring and adaptive evaluation. Any deviation or anomalous behavior was analyzed rigorously. Using advanced profiling techniques, internal safeguards ensured that the network could withstand infiltration attempts without exposing critical operations missions. In the dark, highlighted the agency's mastery of invisibility, timing, and adaptive improvisation. In high-risk environments, every step taken was calculated to produce maximum intelligence yield with minimal exposure. The final segments emphasizing the shadow legacy demonstrate the cumulative strength of these methodologies, integrating human skill, psychological resilience, operational foresight, and technological analysis into a seamless system. The legacy shows that the real power of an intelligence agency lies not in visible force, but in the ability to observe, predict, and influence outcomes silently. Each operation, from the recruitment of agents to cross-border espionage and counterintelligence, was part of a larger strategic vision, a vision that prioritized foresight, discipline, and the controlled application of influence. The analytical insight reveals that the agency's strength emerged from continuous adaptation, rigorous training, meticulous planning, and uncompromising operational secrecy. By studying every detail of the early years, one can understand the principles that continue to guide modern intelligence. Practices the integration of psychological profiling, adaptive planning, counterintelligence, and silent operations across decades, created a system that remained resilient, responsive, and effective under pressure. This comprehensive review of the first 8 segments underscores the importance of strategy, discretion, and foresight in intelligence operations, and offers a blueprint for understanding how a shadow network evolves into a decisive but invisible force in the regional and global context. The story of these operatives is not only about missions and tactics, but about the creation of a culture where observation, silence, and precision become the ultimate instruments of national security. The combination of psychological mastery, operational discipline, and technological adaptation creates an ecosystem where intelligence is continuously generated, threats neutralized before they materialize, and strategic influence applied without detection. This synthesis of all elements provides a unique lens to analyze the shadow agency's capabilities, its successes, and the enduring lessons from modern intelligence practice. If you enjoyed this documentary, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they too can explore the hidden layers of intelligence. Disclaimer: this documentary is based on historical research, open source information, and declassified materials. Any fictionalization is minimal and intended solely for narrative continuity. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for watching, and stay curious, because in the world of shadows, every detail matters.